All right, everybody, it's time. We're going to get started. And I want you to know that if you missed the first part or anybody comes in later, we're going to render the video and publish it within an hour or so of the show. So you can pick up the beginning or the end if you have to leave early. Hey, Thor, my invisible buddy. Good to see you. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I've learned about Amanda. Amanda Gonzalez is the Jefferson County Clerk and Recorder, running elections for nearly 500,000 voters. She is the only candidate for Colorado Secretary of State who has run large-scale elections and helped draft the laws that made Colorado a national model for voting. She is a bar-certified election attorney and an adjunct professor of election law at the University of Denver. She is the only candidate for Secretary of State who is a lawyer, and she would make history as Colorado's first Latina and first openly LGBTQ Secretary of State. Amanda says she started her civic life in elementary school when she was at a local park where children were playing sports. She went from folding chair to folding chair, asking the adults seated there to vote for a school bond measure to fund permanent classrooms. In her work since, Amanda has focused on one question: does this system work for everyone or just a few? She's trained volunteer attorneys in Colorado election law, built coalitions to expand ballot access, and worked alongside county clerks, lawmakers, and community members to design policies that bring more people into our democracy. For Amanda, democracy isn't just about casting a ballot, it's about whether people can afford a home, earn a fair wage, get health care when they need it, feel safe in their communities, and whether all of us get an equal say in shaping that future. The Secretary of State's role is not legislative, it's about running elections. Amanda Gonzalez is already doing it. Please welcome Amanda Gonzalez.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's like that was such a kind introduction. And yeah, it's so nice to be able to join with people today.
And we're so glad you could. I know you're really busy and you're racing all over the state trying to meet everyone so they know who you are and that you can tell them what you would like to offer them in service. Amanda, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you were born, where you grew up, where you went to school, and how you became an attorney.
Yes, I think I became an attorney in a little bit more of a happenstance way than you should. So I grew up in Southern California, and I was the first in my immediate family to graduate from college. I was the first in my immediate family to graduate from law school. And yeah, I think like a lot of first gen folks, you don't necessarily have all the breadcrumbs, right? You don't have somebody to tell you, oh, this is how this works. And so one of my first jobs out of college, I was a grant writer at a boys' home. So it was 13 to 18-year-olds wards of the state who were on probation. And I was like, man, I could be the best grant writer on the planet. And these kids are still stuck in the system. And so I literally like Googled from work about how to make systemic change. That's how much of a nerd like 20-year-old me was. And it said go to law school. And so I Googled like how do you go to law school? And I signed up for an LSAT that was less than 6 weeks later. I bought a Kaplan book on my way home from work and like studied at my dining room table for the next couple weeks. It was not until I got to law school at DU that I fully understood that like everyone else took an LSAT prep class. I just didn't know, right? That's part of when you're the first in your family to do something. Yeah, and so it all worked out. So I was really glad to have gone to DU and really glad to have got my law degree there. But yeah, not maybe the traditional way of doing that.
Yeah, but cool. That's cool that you can tell that story because again, we're talking about accessible for all and somehow you found a way to wheedle into the system even though there wasn't a direct pathway for you. We need to make it easier for people who want to serve. Listen, I want to
Yeah.
tell the audience our team's going to keep posting stuff in the chat. Copy and paste those links. They're fun. You can learn more about Amanda. There's things you can do. Want to make sure you're registered to vote and that you do vote in this primary. That is critical. And also, we were concerned about this being a holiday that we might have low attendance, and people keep filtering in. But know to tell your friends that the whole video will be rendered in about an hour after this, so you can share it with them. It'll be on Substack, and our socials team will post links to it all over social media too. Thanks to everyone who came. We're seeing some fun comments here in the chat. Teresa's posted how you can follow Amanda's campaign and where to register to vote. People are saying hooray for Amanda. Remember last week we had hundreds of people here and we had Steve Schmidt from the Lincoln Project on. So now you guys are the rock stars. We want you to comment, let us know what you want to hear, what you're thinking. Let's ask Amanda a couple of questions. You helped build Colorado's election system into what it is today. You used your expertise and experience as an attorney and advocate and your deep election knowledge to write Colorado laws about voting in election. Writing a bill is different from passing one. Writing legislation for elections requires knowing how elections actually work, where the system breaks down, and how to craft language that will hold up in court when it gets challenged, because everything gets challenged these days. Tell our listeners about some of the election laws you've written for Colorado.
Yeah, right. It is really difficult to defend a system unless you have helped build it, unless you have actually been on the ground running it. And like you said, I am the only person in this race who has written election law. I'm the only attorney, and I'm the only person who has experience running elections. There are a couple. I have gotten to have a really rewarding career. And so maybe I'll tell you about two that I am most proud of. So the first is worked on multilingual ballot access with then State Representative Yadira Caraveo, who, when she was running for representative at the state level, she was knocking on doors, she was talking to voters, largely in Adams County. And many of those folks were saying, can you help me fill out my ballot? Or can you help me understand my ballot? Because if you are somebody for whom English isn't your first language, our ballot language can be really, really confusing. Heck, if English is your first language, right, it can be really, really confusing. I have friends who are attorneys and they will call me and say, if I like this one, do I vote yes or do I vote no? Right. And so according to the census, we had 86,000 Coloradans all over the state who lived in counties where there were no translated election materials available. In 2020, only 4 out of the 64 counties were covered under a federal law that required them to translate their ballots. And so we updated the law, we created a threshold in Colorado so that any county that meets that threshold had to offer translated sample ballots and then translated ballots at their vote centers. And so it changes a little bit year to year depending on what the census says, but we moved that number from 4 to about 22, meaning that 86,000 more Coloradans had access to being able to read and understand their ballot independently, which was the goal. And so that was really, really cool.
That sounds
Um,
wonderful. I mean, you don't think about that, but when you mentioned it, I think our ballot language is sometimes confusing. And I speak the
yes,
language it's
yes,
written in. So I want to
yes.
note that Thor commented about loving you on the Common Cause Colorado Forum with Ali Belknap. I first
Thank
came
you.
to know about your work when you were the the executive director of Common Cause. So tell our audience about your advocacy and legislative work in that role and how that relates to the Secretary of State.
Yes. So Common Cause is a fantastic nonpartisan organization. If you don't know them, you should go check them out because they are really working to make sure that everyday voters have a voice, mostly at the Capitol, but everywhere that policy is made. And so they have done fabulous work over the last 50 plus years of their existence, nationally helping to lower the voting age to 18. Here in Colorado, a ton of work around campaign finance reform and making sure that we're doing everything we can to ensure that the wealthy billionaire class is not outweighing the voices of all of us normal people. And so, yeah, in that role, that was where I was working when I worked on multilingual ballot access. I helped write the bill that created automatic voter registration at our DMVs, which has now registered more than 800,000 Coloradans or helped them update their information. Um, lots of really important work. that helps to make sure that everyday people actually have their voices heard. The other really cool thing I got to do as the executive director of Common Cause is lead the Just Vote election protection program. And so, as you mentioned in the intro, there's a hotline that people can call that gives them a nonpartisan resource. The parties also usually have something similar, which is great. Some people do want to call their party, but some people want a nonpartisan resource. And so I would train hundreds of attorneys in election law. And that way they could answer questions of voters, either who were experiencing voter suppression or more commonly just wanted some kind of basic information about making sure that their voice was heard. So, incredibly rewarding work. One of those organizations that, even though I haven't worked there in several years now, I still will find myself saying we because I am just so proud of the work that Common Cause does, and they do it for all of us.
I mean, it's an outstanding organization, but I'm going to segue here because you mentioned the DMVs about building trust. You do that when government works for the people that are using it. The Secretary of State's office isn't just for elections, it's where Colorado businesses register, where charities file, where notaries get commissioned. These systems touch nearly every Coloradan at some point, and they should work for the people using them. The Jefferson County DMV that you run has a 4.8-star Google rating with over 10,000 positive reviews, a higher rating than most coffee shops. How does it feel knowing that?
Yes, right. Like I am so proud of that because one, like who goes online and rates a DMV, let alone positively? Um, but our whole philosophy is that government should not make you feel stupid. It should be welcoming and it should be inclusive, right? Like the whole reason government exists, and I am a big fan, right, is that the
But
government is the set.
DMVs, Amanda? Come on. I mean, this is crazy wonderful.
Government is the set of things that we decide to do together. And right, motor vehicles is one of them. And I would take that exact philosophy to the Secretary of State's office of how do we make this work for everybody? How do we make everybody feel included? I want people to leave any office I run saying like, "Oh my gosh, that was like a really positive experience and I got what I needed." Because that is what we are actually here for.
What a concept to walk away from a government desk and say, they helped me, right?
Yes, and we hear it all the time. It's really great.
So I want to remind you all, there'll be a video posted of this too. So those that ran away for this 3-day weekend will still get to see it. We'll post the link all over Substack and on social media. And Thor has posted the link to the Blue Sky handle for Indivisible Colorado. He's my buddy there, and follow them. You'll see us talking to each other on that app. And you'll see Amanda on that app too. So everybody's been asking about threats to our election. We're going to get there in a minute, but I want to ask you about trust. I
Mm.
think trust starts with transparency. I mean, studies show that voters are more likely to vote when they trust the system. And you've delivered the largest number of ballots cast in any Colorado county, and you've achieved this increase while coming in millions of dollars under budget.
Mm.
Talk about building trust in government. Tell us how you achieved that.
Yeah. So it was 2025. So Jefferson County is not the largest county in Colorado, but we had more people in that coordinated election show up and vote than any other county, which that is what it is about, right? Democracy only works when everyone actually participates. Democracy cannot be for a wealthy or select few. And so we did a couple of things. One, we created a full time community engagement role in the office because some people feel great about coming into a government office and they know how it works, and some people don't, right? And we have to be out where the people are if we're going to serve them. So we were at every high school, every dispensary, every laundromat that would take us, the whole idea being let's go find the people who need good and accurate information about voting so that we get them more involved in civic life.
And
And
you
so,
did
yeah.
this and came on in under budget. I mean,
Yes.
that's crazy, wild, and wonderful.
I used to be the CEO of a small business. And I think once you've run a small business, you're always just like a little bit of a penny pincher.
Okay, let's do talk about these questions we're getting on threats to our election. Election security includes protecting the ballot, the voter, the workers, and the data from threats that are
Yes.
physical, digital, foreign and domestic, large and small, and security isn't static for these. As Secretary
Yes.
of State, how are you going to address new threats that keep coming?
Yes. As you mentioned earlier, our running elections is a really technical job, right? There are hundreds of pages of law and rule that govern how to run elections to make sure that every single step of the process is safe and secure. These jobs are so much more complicated than they were, 10, 15, 20 years ago, because you have to be an expert in mis and disinformation. You have to be an expert in cybersecurity. And so having the expertise of actually having run elections is going to be critical as we go into the 2028 presidential. And there are a couple key pieces of that, right? We need to make sure that the clerk and recorder in every county has the resources they need to protect our democracy. We need to make sure that we are at the ready for any kind of mis or disinformation campaign that comes our way. We know that those are going to continue to get worse because it is about sowing confusion. It is about sowing distrust so that when President Trump and his party don't win in 26 and 28, they can tell you that story that they have already been trying to sow, right? And so it is our responsibility to make sure that we are standing up and saying, absolutely not. Elections are free, fair, transparent, and we are going to make sure that everyone has access.
Well, that's another great segue because I wanted to talk to you about breaking down some barriers and including everyone. You said make sure everyone has access.
Yes.
You were the first Latina and openly LGBTQ person elected as Jefferson County Clerk. Your leadership in that role reflects your inclusive, forward thinking values that you are able to maximize here in Colorado. Tell us about how your background will inform your role as Colorado Secretary of State.
Yes. I mean, representation matters not just because of who we are and our backgrounds. That is important. But it is also about what we fight for, right? My grandmother was undocumented when she first came to the United States. And I know what is at stake when our country turns its back on people that just want to make a good life for their friends, their family, and their community. And we are at this moment where politics as usual is not going to work, right? We have to have every voice at the table and we have to fight like hell to take care of each other. And that is exactly what I'm going to do as Secretary of State.
I love that. So you're endorsed by another activist, Colorado Democrat running for elected office, and she's one of my favorite candidates too, Julie Gonzalez. Not related, different spelling.
No, I'm
Um,
a Z, she's an S.
yes.
But all the Gonzaleses, wonderful people, vote for everybody.
So for anyone who might not know, and I hope you already know, but I'll tell you, Colorado Senator Julie Gonzalez is running for U.S. Senate to replace John Hickenlooper. This is another tough campaign by a Latina. Talk to us about running as a woman and minority candidate.
Mm,
Is that hard?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, many candidates, whether they be women, whether they be folks of color, out folks, are often told, wait your turn, right? We already have somebody that the institution has in mind for that role. Wait your turn, right? And what we are seeing right now in our democratic institutions is that the time is now. We cannot afford for anybody to be waiting their turn. We all have to stand up and protect our communities, right? What we're seeing, I often talk about how voting rights are the foundation of all other rights. And so, whether you care about affordable housing or clean air and water, or your neighbors being able to afford their rent and their health insurance in the same month, we all have to stand up and do our part. And so, I am just thrilled. I'm thrilled to be running, but I am thrilled to also see this slate of candidates that are on the ballot with me who deeply care about their communities and are not doing this because they want their next political step on the ladder. right? I am
Right.
running. I think many of us are running because, I mean, as Julie talks about, no one is going to save us but us. And so let's all do our part.
Look what Lori put in the chat. Politicians have forgotten they're supposed to work for us and the best interests
Yes.
of the American people. So
Yes.
you've spent your career making sure people who are left out of elections, out of government, out of the systems that are supposed to serve them are included. You wrote laws expanding ballot access, fought for multilingual voting, and you brought vote centers into jails. As
Yes.
Secretary of State, you pledged to keep funding the Colorados who've been finding the Colorados who've been told that their vote doesn't matter. Working people, rural voters, young voters, voters with disabilities, um, anyone the system is left behind, and proving to them that it will work for them. How do you change their minds? And how do you prove to them that their vote can be a force for change?
Yes. Oftentimes, it is about making sure that people know their rights. So, jail voting was one of the best things I've had the privilege of doing with my career. So, here's the know your rights portion of the podcast today. Um, Folks should know, and this is different state to state, but in Colorado, the only people who are not eligible to vote because of involvement with our criminal justice system are people who are currently serving a term of confinement for a felony conviction. So you're in prison for a felony. If you are on probation, you're eligible to vote. If you're on parole, you're eligible to vote. If you are done with your sentence, you're out and back in your community, you're eligible to vote. If you're waiting for your trial in a jail, you're eligible to vote. If you're serving time for a misdemeanor, you are eligible to vote. So every election season, I have folks tell me, "Oh, I'm not eligible. I have a prior." No, if you are done with your sentence on probation, on parole, you're eligible to vote. And so um, Jefferson County has about 850 eligible voters in the jail on any given day. And in 2022, only 3 out of those 850 eligible voters actually cast their ballot, right? That is a civil rights issue. We know that people of color and low income people are overrepresented in our criminal justice system. And so I went to our sheriff and said, "Hey, let me put a vote center in your jail," right? We obviously have a systemic problem if only 3 out of 850 people are voting. And she was not amenable to that and did not want to have a vote center in the jail. And so we worked with community organizations like CCJRC, like Colorado Common Cause, and passed a bill in our legislature that made Colorado the first in the country to require in-person voting in every single county jail. And you asked about people believing in the process and participating in the process. And we talked to a voter who was incarcerated. He was 29, Latino guy. He said that he had never voted before. He didn't know he was eligible, but since we were there, he came in and asked about his eligibility. It was the first time that he had ever voted. And he said it was one of the top 5 experiences of his life and that it made him feel like he mattered. And he does matter. And all voters matter. And we need to make sure that their voices are heard. And so that is the story about the time that I cried in a jail because I was just so moved by his participation. And that is what this work is about.
I'm with Lori. I mean, this
Yeah,
is
that's great.
so exciting because, I mean, let's consider that we want to rehabilitate anyone who's committed a crime, right? We want them to come back into society and be a functioning
Yes.
member of society. So, how better to make them be involved and say,
Yes.
hey, we want you to vote, come vote,
Yeah.
participate, shape the laws that,
And the data says that there is a correlation between increased civic participation and reduced rates of recidivism, right? So when we help people be tied into and active in their community, they are more likely to do better in the long run, which is exactly what you want to see.
I mean, I'm reminded of Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock saying that a vote is like a prayer. And I mean, that
Mm,
story about making sure that inmates in jail can vote is an act of love. I mean, it's just an act of
yes.
love, Amanda. I mean,
Yeah.
how wonderful. And
Yeah. I mean, our voting is about hope, right? Like when you're casting your vote, you are putting into that ballot box your hopes for the future. And so, yeah, absolutely everybody who is eligible to vote, I want their voice to be heard.
I think that's wonderful. Tracy asked, can we get election day made a holiday in Colorado and enforce it
Mm.
as such with Colorado employers? It should be nationally. This is what democracy should look like. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, I think a holiday can be part of the equation. But often, what really works for voters is what we have in Colorado, where we have multiple ways to vote. You can vote the ballot that was mailed to you, or you can go in person, whatever is better for you, right? We have a long early vote period. So, vote centers for this June's primary election are actually going to open everywhere. There are some open now, usually at your county clerk's office, but vote centers will open up all over the state on Monday, the 22nd. So I think what is most important is having all of those different pieces so that it works for everybody. Oftentimes my mom worked retail for a really long time. She's actually worked at Costco for more than 30 years. And, you know, if you're working retail, you don't always get the holidays off, right? If you're working in hospitality, if you are working in a restaurant, you don't always get the holidays off. And so while I think a holiday could be an important piece, it's all of the other pieces that we need to keep as well, because we need to make sure that all workers are able to vote and that it's as convenient for them as it is anybody else.
I mean, I think that's wonderful. And Christine has echoed that. She says, I love that a vote is like a prayer. It certainly feels
Mm.
that way when I put my ballot in the box. One thing I really love about the Colorado voting system is Colorado ballot tracks. So as
Yes.
soon as my ballot was placed in the ballot box. I mean, just within hours, I got an email from the Secretary of State's office saying, your ballot has been received. You can follow your ballot from the moment you sign it till it's counted. And I really love
Yeah.
that. And there's also a tremendous effort to cure ballots that have something at issue with them. Can you talk about how you want to work with that system when Secretary of
Yes.
State?
So, curing is the process by which, if we are not able to verify that you are who you say you are, we might reach back out to you, or we will reach back out to you and say, "Hey, we can't open this ballot until that we know who you are, who you say you are." So, for example, sometimes first-time voters, maybe when I registered and I filled out my voter registration form, I signed my name very pretty, right? Amanda M. Gonzalez. And then maybe when I signed my ballot for the first time, I was like, oh shoot, I'm dropping it off. And I put it on the back of my steering wheel and I signed it real quick. If there's only one signature on file for you, we might not be able to match those two signatures. And so, if that's the case, what happens is we send you a note and says, hey, you have until 8 days after the election to verify that you are who you say you are. Otherwise, we're unable to open this ballot envelope. We're unable to count it. And so, that is called a cure letter, or the cure process. And that is really important because, like I said, we want to make sure that we're counting every eligible voter's ballot and we're accurately doing that. And so, you might get, if you're signed up for ballot tracks, then we're going to reach out to you via text message or email or whatever contact we have for you. Otherwise, you'll get a letter in the mail. And those are really important. I think sometimes people think, oh, the election has passed, I've missed the thing. But absolutely not. That's one of the reasons that on election night or for the days afterwards, you might see, these are unofficial results. That's because folks who need to cure their ballots, as well as our military and overseas voters, have some additional time after the election to make sure everything gets in. And we don't actually certify the election until after we've done an audit on it as well. So none of those results are final on election night. If you are somebody that gets one of those cure letters, please do fill it out because we want to make sure that your voice is heard.
I love that. I love that you get the right to cure. If there's anything that they
Yes.
find, not just
Yes.
kosher about your ballot, I mean, you should have the opportunity to at least answer any questions
Yeah.
about that. M. Hope has written, in California, Republican candidate said he lost because homeless people voted for Democrats. She's worried about the homeless voting rights. Do you have any comments on that?
Absolutely. So if you are 18 years old, a US citizen, you've lived in Colorado for 22 days, you are eligible to vote. That includes people that don't have permanent housing, right? Just because you don't have permanent housing doesn't mean that your voice shouldn't be heard in your community. And so, for any candidate, for any institution, to say that people's voices are not as valuable because they don't have housing is absurd. Right? Like we have had a democracy historically that did not include everyone, right? Our democracy would not have originally included you and I,
Right.
because it was about
Exactly.
men's voices and property owners' voices. And thankfully, that is not the democracy that we have today. We still need to make strides to make sure it actually works for everyone. But you do not need to own property, and you certainly don't need to have permanent housing in order to be eligible to vote. So, if you or somebody you love in your life is not permanently housed right now, they are still eligible to vote. What happens is we use the address of the place where you usually are. So if you are usually staying at a shelter or you're usually sleeping in your car at a specific parking lot, we use that address as your residential address so we know which ballot to get you, but you are absolutely still eligible to vote.
I really love that. Once again, that's an act of love. I mean, the people who are homeless are not always people who have just chosen not to work and not participate
Yeah.
in the economic system. Sometimes it's a woman who had to get her children out of an unsafe home. Sometimes
Yes.
it's a husband whose wife has passed away and he's going through a transition and has just sort of lost his way. I mean, it's all sorts of people out there. It's people who need to
Yeah.
be loved and cared for and might
I mean,
still really want to participate. And I love that you
yeah.
defend that right to participate. I want to
You
remind
God.
so go,
I was just saying, I
I,
think Pew did a study like a number of years ago that said the average American doesn't have an extra $400 in case of emergency, right? And so many people can't always make things work. And so yes, we want to make sure that regardless of your economic situation, you're still able to cast your ballot and have your voice heard.
yeah, and when we're seeing such an uncertain job market, especially for young
Mhm.
people who are just trying to break into it too, I mean, we need to remember that there's all kinds of people out there that need help that are in transition, and keeping them in the fold of democracy means they're still part of it all. And I mean, I just love this whole approach. I want to ask you another question about defending the ballot. The Trump administration is trying to use the US Postal Service as a buffer against the right to vote in the way that Coloradans vote. They're trying to say that if the vote isn't counted on election day, it shouldn't count. Of course, they're trying to get our voter rolls so that that data can be used for all sorts of things. Um, how do you defend against that? I mean, isn't that just a big, huge escalating problem that you're going to have to step into?
It absolutely is. And it is one of the reasons that it is critical that we have somebody in the Secretary of State's role who has actually run elections before, right? 2028 is not going to be the time for on the job training. Right now, so back in March, the president issued an executive order that directed USPS to get a lot more involved in our elections. And it also directed DHS to create a list of citizen eligible voters. And so, what we are talking about is federal agencies that are not elections experts suddenly being inserted into a process and just creating the opportunity for errors, for confusion. And it would be really, really bad for voters across the country. So, that USPS comment period is actually open right now. We can send around socials on, we have a form that people can easily fill out if they want to submit a comment. I'm somebody who does elections day in and day out, so I submitted a comment that was more than 10 pages, but literally voters in Colorado who are worried about protecting mail-in ballots could submit their experience in their own communities. That is just as helpful. But this is really important. I also think that it is just a ploy, as you mentioned. The administration has demanded voter records from our state. Our state has refused, and that is something that I would continue to protect as the Secretary of State. And I think that this is just a ploy in some ways to get that voter information after we've already told them no. So continue to pay attention to that executive order and the data pieces and the rulemaking around USPS and DHS.
Segueing right from your this election is not the time for on the job training. Why don't I just tee you up? Why are you the better candidate in this race? And what do you most want the people to know about how you will serve if elected?
Yeah. The very short version is that our Secretary of State is the democracy defender in chief, right? This is not just a figurehead position. This is the firewall that protects your right to vote. And I am the only person in this race who has ever run an election. I am the only person in this race who is an attorney. It's not a requirement to be an attorney, but there is a reason that our last four secretaries of state have all been attorneys, right? Because we need to use every tool in the legal toolbox to fight back against the federal administration and make sure that we are protecting the right to vote. I'm also the only person in this race who has run a large government organization. So, the clerk and recorder's office right now, I run elections for more voters than there are registered voters in the entire state of Wyoming. I have a staff of 115 full-time employees, and a $20 million budget, up to 1,000 temporary election workers that we hire in a presidential. For reference, the Secretary of State's office is about 145 employees. And so this is a really technical position, and I have the skills to do it.
I love that answer. I can feel the fire there. You really want in the fight. You really want to defend democracy.
We
And I
we
got to
have
say
to.
that's who I talk to on this show. These are the guests that I invite to come or that I allow to come if they ask to come, or democracy defenders, because I think we're at a critical point. I think people need to know who's out there defending democracy and wanting to work with them, wanting to serve, wanting to work with them. And I think all of these people are getting a sense of that. But also, because it is Juneteenth, we need to remember that, including the Black people that were finally set free from slavery, is not very long lived in this country. It wasn't that
Yes.
long ago when Juneteenth, the occasion of the news reaching Texas, happened. We're still struggling to include everyone. We're still fighting for democracy. And we are in this time, at this time, in this moment, with all that we're presented with for a reason. And I think the people that watch this show, who come on this show, are all about trying to figure out ways in community to stand up to what's going on and preserve what's best, to do acts of love, to make prayers by voting, and so on. So I want to ask you a question that goes to your past. Thinking about that little girl at the park, encouraging adults to vote for funding for permanent classrooms, how will you, as Secretary of State, help save free and fair elections and the principles of one person, one vote for the children who will cast their ballots a decade or more from now?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so I have an amazing, I want a little story. I have an amazing team of volunteers that are working on this campaign. Like, I just could not do it without them. The amount of work that people are putting in is really humbling. And one of my volunteers did not go with her family on a spring break trip, and because she wanted to be able to help on the campaign, and didn't tell me this until the family had already made all their plans. And I was like, I can't let you do this. And her response was, I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for our democracy. Like, you are the best candidate, but this is about protecting democracy for my kids and making sure that it does still exist. And so, right, it is absolutely going to take all of us. We act like democracy is this machine that just keeps running on its own, and it absolutely doesn't. It is experienced election officials standing up and putting their foot down and saying, absolutely not, we are going to protect the right to vote. But it is also ordinary people not only voting, but signing up to be election workers, signing up to talk to fellow community members about actually voting in this election. Lots of people don't vote in primaries, right? It is normal people talking to their neighbors and friends about the importance of this moment right now that is actually going to stand up for our democracy over time.
What a great answer. I want to tell everyone that's here, our team's posted concrete calls to action and resource links, including links to Amanda's campaign in the chat for your further action and information. And we hope you'll use them, just copy and paste them. And I will post those and our team's research links that we did. We've discovered a lot of things about Amanda that are interesting that you might like to know in the show notes when the video of this interview is published. And you can find it on Substack or on any of your favorite podcast platforms. Look for Our Democracy Collective. That's our nonprofit production team on Substack and on YouTube. And you can find me on Substack at Sandi Ault, reporting from the wild. We'd like to have your support. One of the things we do at Our Democracy Collective, like Amanda did at Common Cause, is we have interns that we try to teach defending democracy too. We have writers, we have video editors, we have graphic designers, we have all sorts of people. And so we would love to have your support. Follow us on all social media. I think one thing that we want to ask you, Amanda, is you're getting around the state, you're meeting a lot of people. And there are a lot of people in Colorado who aren't on the Front Range, whose voices aren't as regularly heard. Is there something that we need to know about how people on the Western Slope, how people in
Mm.
Southwestern and Southeastern Colorado, and even up in Northwestern Colorado, who are in rural and agricultural areas, how are they doing with the current regime in charge in terms of wanting to participate in democracy?
Yeah. As I travel the state, I'm finding that there are some really universal themes. Right? People are feeling unheard because they are watching this president, run amok, but they're also watching the rich get richer and they're hurting, right? That everyday Coloradans are trying to figure out, how do I afford my soaring grocery bill? How do I afford my soaring healthcare bill? And the way that we are heard on those issues is through voting. But that can feel abstract to people. When they are just trying to get through their day and they're just trying to get food on the table, I don't blame them for not being able to pay attention to every single nuanced thing. But it really is the importance of participating in every election, but in particular in the primaries right now. In many counties, the primaries are kind of the deciding election, and statewide, that is often the case as well. And so, having your voice heard now is just as important, if not more so, than it is in November. But I am really pleased to say that we have more in common across the state than we have that divides us.
That's good to know. About primaries, I think people don't realize that if we don't get the right candidate on the ballot in the primaries, then we don't get to vote for them in the general election. And so
Yes.
it's so important for people to take part. What happens is we feel a bit of a political divide. There are two parties. Colorado has done a wonderful job of letting unaffiliated voters vote in primaries, right? Can you talk about that?
Yes. Yes. So unaffiliated voters are the fastest growing group of voters in the state. They now account for more than half of voters in the state are not affiliated with any party. Right? And so if you are a registered Democrat, then your ballot should already be in your hot little hands or in your mailbox, right? But you're going to get a Democratic primary ballot. If you're a registered Republican, you get a Republican primary ballot. And if you are an unaffiliated voter, you get both. Now, you have to pick one. You can't vote for like governor over here and secretary of state over there. You have to pick one of those ballots and turn that one in. But you get to participate and you get to choose which one is best for you, which I think is really important, especially given, like I said, how many unaffiliated voters are in our state. We want to make sure that everybody's voice is heard.
I think this is critical because we're seeing a political divide just widen and widen and widen. And I'm not going to put fault on either side right now because we don't have time to talk
Yeah,
about that.
it's not
But
useful.
what I would like to say is that right now it's more up versus down. It's more rich versus poor. It's more them versus us in terms of control and power. And the power belongs to the people in a democracy. And so we can never just say you're a Democrat, so you're good. We can never say that. We can never just
Mhm.
say you're a Republican, so you're bad. We have to say we're a democracy. It's all of us. Let's get some candidates on the ballot who can do something for us, and then let's get them to the election so we can vote for them. And if we don't do
Yes.
that in the primary, what's going to happen eventually is corporations and dark money are going to buy the candidates all the way up and down the line. So this is the time for people to really engage at the grassroots level, I think. It's just hard sort of taking away that poison pill of party division. And I think
Mm.
Colorado allowing unaffiliateds to vote in the primary is one way to dissolve that poison pill and make it go away. What do you
Yeah,
think?
absolutely. Like I said, everybody needs to have their voice heard, and the primaries are really the time to vote your values, right? You're looking at multiple candidates who are running affiliated with your party. So, hopefully that means you have some shared interest to begin with. But like you said, there are really big differences across the spectrum of people's values, what they believe in, why they're running for office, and who they're beholden to. You can go on the Secretary of State's website. You can look at campaign finance filings under a program called Tracer and see who is giving money to these various candidates, and do the people that they're taking money from align with your values. That is a great way to help sort of make sure that this person is actually going to represent you well.
Not only that, but I mean, let's talk about inclusion. We've mentioned it several times, but you're all about inclusion. I mean, you came from an organization that you ran called Common Cause. It wasn't called us versus them. It wasn't
Yep.
called blue or red. It was called Common Cause. And you've talked about including homeless people, people in prison, disabled people, people with language barriers, poor, rich, it doesn't matter. You want them all included. So, how do we bring this state together where there are divisions
Yes.
already between the parties? How do we keep stimulating that sense of being of common cause? How do we do that?
Democracy and voting rights should be the one thing we can agree on, right? Like, we can disagree on policy, we can disagree on how to spend tax dollars, but we should agree that the process by which we select our leaders and have our voices heard should be fair. So I don't know if you've seen the first campaign video that I put out. We've put out a couple since then, but was actually me and my dad. So I am the only Democrat in my family, and my dad is somebody who voted for Trump multiple times. We disagree on lots of things. And when I asked him to be in the video with me, it's a little bit of a funny back and forth, but when
It's
I asked him to
very
be in the
cute.
video,
I love it. I've
oh,
seen it. It's
thank you.
really cute. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I should ask him. I don't know if he would have been able to do that for me if I was running for a legislative position or something like that, right? The Secretary of State's office, yes, it is elected in a partisan way. I am a Democrat. I'm running as a Democrat. I hope my values are very, very clear. And the office itself is nonpartisan, right? It is about protecting the right to vote for everyone, including people that I disagree with, right? My dad votes differently than I do. I still want his voice to be heard because that is what democracy is about. And so, I absolutely think that this is one of the spaces where we should be able to come together.
Well, I want to say that this is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on because you are so inclusive and you always have been throughout your career at Common Cause. And that was one thing that drew me to you. When I found out you were running for Secretary of State, I couldn't wait. And I ran up to you at Assembly and said, I
Yes.
have to meet you. I've been with Common Cause forever. But the thing about it is, we're never going to get anywhere if we don't come together. We're just not. It's just going to keep dividing and dividing. And right now is a critical moment for the people as the populace, as the down versus the up, as the us versus them that are looting the treasury and causing wars and taking away
Yes.
our rights and freedoms. I mean, we have got to figure out a way to come together. And the place that we can do that is on the ballot. It's the vote.
Yes.
It's the only
Yes.
place I can see where we can mend this up. And so
Yeah.
I'm excited to see what you will do as the first Latina and the first openly LGBTQ Secretary of State. I wish you luck. I know you're going to win. And I want you to come back on the podcast before the general election after you win your primary. Does anyone in the chat want to tell Amanda how much we've enjoyed this show today? I think it's been wonderful. We had
Oh,
someone who was on a plane, Christine, right? Christine's on a plane, joined in. Yeah, Lynn, welcome. I think everyone has had a really good time today. It's been a small crowd because of Juneteenth and the holiday, but the video will be out shortly. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you so much. We're so glad you came on. And thank you, everyone who came. We'll see you on the next one.
Good to see y'all.
Bye.
Thank you so much.